Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are hearing us from. Welcome to today's space where we'll be talking about affordable housing agencies. I am your host today. I'm Allan, real estate research analyst at Cytonn. And with me today are two panelists, Joseph and Effie, who will be taking us through this day's report. Maybe I'll give them the floor to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Effie.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Effie Zuma. I'm a research and investments analyst at Cytonn, and I'm glad to be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Effie. Joseph.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseph Moridi. I'm a real estate research analyst at Cytonn Investments, and I'm hoping we are going to have an impactful engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, our panelists. And maybe let's just kick off. Not much further ado. We'll start with discussing what is affordable housing, and also given the constitutional mandate and the ambitious housing agenda set forth by the Jubilee and Kenya Kwanza governments. Joseph, could you elaborate on the key achievements and challenges encountered in the implementation of affordable housing initiatives?
Thank you, Allan. So we can define affordable housing as housing which is adequate and costs less than 30% of the income of an individual per month for the purposes of either renting or buying. I take for instance someone who earns 1 million per month. For them, affordable housing starts at 300,000. And take another person who earns, let's say, 50,000. For them, affordable housing will start at 15,000. So we can say that affordable housing can be termed as relative depending on how much one person earns per month. So when we talk about the achievements by both Kenya Kwanza and Jubilee government, we can talk more about Jubilee government because Kenya Kwanza government has only been in the office for less than 3 years. So for Jubilee government, we can't fail to mention the establishment of Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, the development of 13,529 affordable housing units, which was a major achievement, the implementation of tenant purchase scheme under the National Housing Corporation. We can also mention the removal of stamp duty for first-time home buyers, as well as the elimination of VAT for affordable housing programs. Now, when we look at Kenya Kwanza government, yet they have not they have not been in the office for a long time, so that we can look comprehensively their achievement and affordable housing, but we can look at their ambitions and what they set to achieve under the affordable housing. They intend to grow the mortgage size from 30,000, less than 30,000, to 1 million annually. They also want to give developers more incentives in order to construct more affordable housing, and also they want to deliver more than 250 housing units annually to the affordable housing program. And also, we cannot fail to recognize the activities by the president, where he has been launching various affordable housing schemes across the country. And we can say, let's give it 5 years time, so that we can look back and say this is what they have actually achieved in the number of units that they have constructed in the first 5-year period. So with that, now I'm looking at the achievements. Looking at the challenges under affordable housing. We look at the two major agencies used in carrying out the affordable housing project. That is the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, excuse me, and the National Housing Corporation. For a Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, there has been increased credit risk, there have been an increased credit risk for loans which are advanced in the real estate sector. This means that more investors are going to exercise cautionary measures. This might limit the funding that KMRC gets from investors, as the increased property prices. Also, one of the major challenge has been the KMRC loan has lagged behind the average mortgage size loan. By 2022 December, the mortgage size was 9 million, the average in the market, while for KMRC it was 8 million. That is for the mortgage size in Nairobi and NMA region, and 4 million in the other parts of the country. This means that many potential home buyers were locked out, and that's it for KMRC. And when we look at National Housing Corporation, there has been the lack of regular funding from the government, which obviously limits the ability to implement affordable housing the agenda. There's also the lack of a clear mandate. When you look at the mandates given to National Housing Corporation, there are over 15 mandates. This means there is no one well-defined mandate for them, which consequently can lead to you can say fragmentation of roles, or there have been overlap in, for example, in the sectors such as research and lending. The other challenge under National Housing Corporation has to be the fraudulent allocation of houses, and also the issue of land development and title acquisition. This means there have been delay in the implementation of projects. And another major challenge has been the lack of accountability. Last year and the last quarter of last year, the Auditor General raised questions regarding the inventory of houses under the National Housing Corporation, where some houses could not be accounted for. I think those are some of the challenges faced by the two agencies in implementing affordable housing agenda. Thank you.
All right, that was interesting. Thank you, Joseph. You've mentioned KMRC and NHC, and maybe I'll give this to Effie to give us a brief overview of the agencies and initiatives that are addressing the affordable housing agenda, and also considering the overview provided on the key affordable housing agencies and initiatives. Maybe you tell us which specific agency or initiative do you believe has had the most significant impact in addressing Kenya's housing needs? Effie?
Okay, thank you, Allan, for the question. So I believe the question is in two parts. First, to give a brief overview of the agencies and initiatives under the government affordable housing agenda, or those that are involved with the government affordable housing agenda. And then the second part is giving my opinion, or in my view, which I believe is the most significant in impacting, which I believe has the most significant impact in addressing Kenya's housing needs. Okay, so let me get straight into the first part of the question. So the affordable housing, affordable housing is a very controversial and widely discussed topic in our country, without a doubt. So Kenya, we are a country that acknowledge that indeed we do have a housing shortage several years ago, and this is not to say that we no longer have a housing shortage. We still do. So after we acknowledge that we do have a housing shortage, the natural next step for us was to determine how best to fix the situation. So the Jubilee government, as my colleague Joseph has pointed out, they first launched the affordable housing program in 2017, which had aimed to construct about 1 million units within a duration of 5 years. So this target, we all know, was far from being achieved. So by the end of the 5 years, only about 13,000 units had been delivered. President Ruto, when assuming office, upheld the initiative and integrated it as one of the 6 foundational pillars of his government agenda. So when we say we have a housing shortage, what exactly do I mean? I mean a shortage for adequate and quality housing, because houses are there, but what is our definition of housing that we are saying we have a shortage of, and this is a shortage of housing, adequate and quality housing that is accessible to everyone and to a certain level of quality and reasonable standards of sanitation. So the government having acknowledged that we do have a dire housing need in our country, has tried to explore numerous approaches through various agencies and housing initiatives to address the pressing demand. And this is now the agencies like the National Housing Corporation, that is NHC, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, KRA, the State Department for Housing and Urban Development, rates which are under the CMA, and even the last being the Affordable Housing Bill now come into play. So these agencies and initiatives are all involved in the implementation of the government's affordable housing agenda. And in our report, we actually look at the distinct role that each and every one of these agencies and initiatives play. So first, I'll look at the National Housing Corporation, that is the NHC. NHC was established by an act of parliament, and its mandate is actually contained in the Housing Act, Cap 17 of the laws of Kenya. So what are the main mandates or the responsibilities of the National Housing Corporation? The first one is the developing and construction of affordable housing units. So under this mandate, NHC has undertaken numerous projects across various counties. Also, one of the main key functions of the NHC is to provide loans to companies and even individuals under the rural and peri-urban housing laws and programs. The other key function I would say for NHC, and this function was introduced and mainly used to, I'm not so sure whether this is happening at the moment, but one of the key functions of NHC was to lend to local authorities so that they can forward lend to employers for them to construct houses for their employees. And lastly, was to undertake one of the main functions of NHC, or what NHC does, is to undertake and encourage research and experiment in all housing related matters. So NHC was formed to be one of the main agencies in the implementation of housing by the government, and they have been quite instrumental in the affordable housing agenda. So NHC is the first agency that we looked at and we have covered in our reports as being one of the agencies under the government's affordable housing agenda. The second one, which Joseph has mentioned, is the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company. So what KMRC does, KMRC was created or was established to come in to address housing demand shortage to address the housing shortage by catalyzing the demand side. So KMRC's main mandate is to provide long-term funds to primary mortgage lenders. So KMRC lends to the primary mortgage lenders, which are banks or SACCOs, as well as microfinance institutions at a lower rate of about 5%. So this now enables the primary mortgage lenders to forward lend to potential home buyers at interest rates that are below 10%. If we are all tracking the interest rates in the market right now, interest rates have gone up even to as high as 16 and 18%. There are some instruments that are offering that. So for KMRC to be able to lend to these primary mortgage lenders at a lower rate of 5%, this has enabled them to lend to Kenyans at interest rates that are significantly lower as compared to the interest rates in the market. And in turn, this has increased the availability of affordable home loans to Kenyans. The third agency we looked at is the Capital Markets Authority. And there is need here to specify what exactly we are looking at in relation to the Capital Markets Authority, because the scope of the CMA is quite wide. So under CMA, we are specifically talking about rates. In our last discussion, we discussed in depth what rates are, the state of the Kenyan rate sector, the challenges, and we even provided for recommendations. So just to recap, REITs are collective investment instruments that pool funds from a diverse pool of investors, and then the proceeds of these funds are either invested into development of property or the acquiring of property. So REITs have the potential to contribute to the affordable housing agenda because they have the capability to ensure that there is timely delivery of housing units. Also, REITs within them and their management, they have expertise in project management, which would be quite instrumental in the affordable housing agenda. There's also streamlining development processes and, most importantly, capital mobilization. So this would help address financing constraints to developers. And lastly, REITs through offtake agreements and arrangements have the capability to de-risk projects for developers because they assure them of a ready market and a reliable income stream. So for the other initiative is the affordable housing bill, which I believe most of us are familiar with. So the main reason why the bill was put together was to provide a legal framework for the implementation of the housing levy, which was declared unconstitutional. So there have been many comments with regards to the bill, because like any other bill, it has its shortcomings and requires a little bit of refinement and streamlining so that it may be a bill that is representative of the entire Kenyan housing scene. And the other agency, I believe this is agency number 5, is the KRA. If you are a Kenyan who's 18 years and older, you are definitely familiar with KRA because they are the principal body charged with collection of taxes on behalf of the government. So someone might be asking themselves, how does KRA come into play with regards to the affordable housing agenda? And simply to answer this is that KRA offers incentives under the affordable housing agenda in order to promote the development of affordable housing units in the country. So some of these incentives that KRA offers include exemptions on VAT as well as corporate tax. There's also the exemption of stamp duty payments for first-time home buyers. And lastly, the last agency that we looked at was the State Department for Housing. So the State Department for Housing is under the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development. And the main things that the State Department for Housing does is mostly involved in housing policy management. But also quite strikingly, some of the main responsibilities and mandates that the State Department for Housing does, they overlap with what the NHC does. So take for instance, they are both involved in the construction of unit or development and management of affordable housing projects. The State Department for Housing also is involved in building research services, which again is another function that has been tasked or allocated to the NHC. So a clear look, an in-depth look into these agencies, begin to realize that there have been overlapping roles that are done by more than one agencies. And as we proceed in the discussion, this will be one of our recommendations that there is a clear need for continuous evaluation of the mandates as well as the responsibilities in order to avoid a duplication of roles. So I believe those are the main agencies and initiatives that are involved with the government's affordable housing agenda and its subsequent implementation in the country. Which now brings me to the second part of the question, where Allan had asked which of the agencies and initiatives I believe has the most significant impact in addressing Kenya's housing needs. So to answer this, let me start by saying that I can't really say for sure there is a superior agency or initiative that has more significant impact in addressing housing in our country. Because in my view, they all complement each other, and hence none of them can fully fill in the gap. So they are complementary towards each other. That being said, I believe that the government should not be constructing homes for Kenyans at all. And I'm sure there are people listening in who share in the same opinions that we as Kenyans are perfectly capable of building our own homes. And if you actually look at the national statistics for home ownership in our country, home ownership, the percentage of home ownership or the rate of home ownership in Kenya actually stands, the national rate stands at about 61%. And less than 5% of those houses were actually constructed by government. So that goes to show, again, that we as Kenyans are perfectly capable of building our own homes. And I think it's now time for the Kenyan government to take a different route and focus on different models that are being employed in more developed countries. Take, for instance, the United Kingdom, and even here in Africa, countries like Zimbabwe, they are encouraging citizens to build their own homes. So they have gone the self-build way. So how then do we as a people start encouraging Kenyans to build their own homes? And simply, the answer is we need to provide affordable home financing to Kenyans so that they can be able to do that. Because one of the main problems most citizens face when it comes to building their own homes is financial constraints. So out of the six listed agencies that have agencies and initiatives that have gone through quickly, KMRC, that is the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company, is one of the body whose direct mandate is to provide affordable housing finance to Kenyans through lending to primary mortgage lenders at lower interest rates. So in my view, KMRC is the one body that holds most potential in stimulating the development of affordable housing in Kenya. The second one for me would be REITs. That is, if only we can revitalize the sector, because as we have discussed, the sector has undergone quite many challenges. 10 years since the regulations were put in place, we have very few rates to show for it. Not a single house that has been developed using funds sourced from rates. So, and again, rates hold an immense potential in the implementation of the affordable housing agenda. So yeah, those would be my takeaways and insights with regards to the question that you have asked, Allan.
Thank you, Effie. That was very insightful. From your discussion, it seems there are gaps still in the agencies. And also, Joseph, you mentioned that there are challenges that the government is still facing. Maybe shed a light on the existing housing agency gaps in Kenya, and which gap identified within NHC do you consider most critical obstacle to achieving affordable housing goals? Joseph?
Okay, thank you, Alan. I'll look at the existing housing gaps among the affordable housing agencies in Kenya. I'll start with KRA. For KRA, there's need to look for other incentives that it can extend to on the supply side, such as to the developers in regards to primary construction materials. KRA can look at other avenues which it can use to generate incentives to the developers, maybe have some tax initiatives on some primary construction materials such as cement and steel, which carry most of the cost in construction. Also, for State Department of Housing, there's need to evaluate its mandate in order to avoid overlap of functions. As Effie had mentioned, there's some overlap of functions, let's say in development and research. And for rates, there are quite a huge gap that lies there. One is that the high investment threshold of 5 million. This has actually locked out very many investors who would have invested if the threshold amount was lowered, let's say to 50,000. And the other challenge for REITs has been the high minimum capital requirement for trustees in REITs. This explains why in Kenya there's only 4 trustees for REITs, and yet again these trustees are all banks. And as we note also, the fourth trustee was only came into being lately in January. That is NCBA Bank. That means there's a lot of gap. There's a huge gap here, and we need to lower this high minimum capital requirement in order to encourage more participation in the segment. There's also need for it to be more flexible and allow a hybrid rates formation. Also, the market needs to open up and allow more legal entities to form rates in the country. For example, entity formations such as corporations. So for KMRC, the biggest challenge has been that KMRC loans, as I had mentioned, have in the longest time that KMRC has been operating, has lagged behind the market average. As I had mentioned that by December 2022, the average mortgage size in the country was 9 million. However, for KMRC, it was 8 million in NMA and 4 million in other parts of the country. This obviously means that more potential home buyers were locked out. They could not secure loans from KMRC. And lastly, you had asked me to mention the critical obstacles in NHC. I have two. One is that I believe there's need for more accountability. As I had mentioned last year, the Auditor General flagged lack of accountability, where there was a strong questions raised in regard to the inventory of houses under the National Housing Corporations, which obviously limits the affordable housing agenda. And another critical obstacle, I believe, is the lack of clear mandate. When you look at NHC, as I had mentioned, it has 15 mandates. How is it going to concentrate on its major mandate? For example, when you look such as KMRC, it has one well-defined role, that is providing loans to primary mortgage lenders, and that is what it only concentrates on. But when you look at NHC, it has a vast fragmented roles, which I believe it reduces its its focus on its main agenda. And I believe there is need for fewer and well-defined roles, so that, let's say, we can well define that NHC, its main role will be lending on a certain percentage, and NHC runs with that role, and I believe it will be more efficient in meeting its objectives. That's it for me. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you, Joseph. It seems NHC is pulling itself apart by handling a lot of things. Okay, based on these gaps and also the challenges, as you've mentioned, Effie, you said Kenya, we have to acknowledge that we still have an affordable housing gap. What do you recommend for the key government agencies and initiatives to address these gaps? And also, second question, given these recommendations, which recommendation do you believe will hold the most potential for immediate implementation and significant impact in Kenya? If you carry on.
Okay, so with regards to the recommendations, we would have to look at each specific agency and initiative, and then go ahead and, after identifying the shortcomings for that particular agency and initiatives, proceed and go ahead to giving recommendations to that are best to mitigate those particular shortcomings. So the first one is on the National Housing Corporation. Joseph has highlighted that NHC mandate covers over approximately 15 diverse areas, including property development, management, research, even financing. The same thing is also same things that are being done by the NHC, the State Department for Housing does. For instance, constructing affordable housing units. There's also the aspect of stimulating building research services. So for that, to cure the overlapping roles, there needs to be a continuous evaluation of policies and mandates by the State Department. There needs to be a continuous evaluation and policies and mandates of all these agencies, so that now we ensure going forward there are no duplication of roles and possibly wastage, because all these agencies and initiatives are being funded by taxpayers' money, remember. So really there's no need to be burdening the taxpayer to fund all these initiatives and agencies, and to actually be agencies that are doing the same thing. I mean, these are things that can be done by one particular agency. So there needs to be that clear distinction as to who gets to do what, so that there is no duplication of roles. That being said, the primary focus of NHC, or the core mandate, is quite ambiguous, because if you look at the mandate as specified in the Housing Act, the initial focus was on lending and providing affordable loans. And currently, with what is happening or the activities of NHC, the focus now appears to be on constructing houses. And then with now the very many mandates and responsibilities the agency has been tasked to do, naturally, even ourselves, if we have many things to do, often we concentrate with perhaps 2 to 3. And then our vision with regards to the other ones and other responsibilities that we have to do now becomes myopic. So the primary mandate for NHC needs to come out clear. And that being said, us as our analysts and vested stakeholders, we are proposing, or we recommend, that the focus of NHC to be on enabling the supply side by supporting developers rather than getting into the actual construction. Because construction of units can actually be done by the private sector, that's private developers. Why then does the NHC now there is no need for the NHC to get into the actual construction of units? The same to the State Department for Housing, because they're also engaged in construction of units. So these two agencies should focus more on enabling rather than doing what the private sector can do. The second agency is the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company. We've established this one has one clear, distinct mandate, that is to provide affordable loans, the availability of affordable home loans to Kenyans. And one of the gaps or existing gaps in the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is the transparency with regards to their lending model, because there have been questions about how does KMRC manage or sustain its lending models when the cost of capital is definitely too high. So there needs to be transparency from KMRC as to how they are able to sustain this particular lending model. The other thing is KMRC can consider being listed in the NSE. So capital markets have the potential to avail more funding, and this actually what how capital markets work is they are private sector led. So again, this alleviates the burden from taxpayers to contribute to these key things, to this affordable housing agenda. And the other thing, the one gap that I noticed with regards to KMRC, its framework does not incorporate affordable renting, because their mandate is to provide affordable home loans to Kenyans for purposes of purchasing units. But these purchasing units may not necessarily be what Kenyans need, especially in urban areas. We've looked at home ownership statistics in the country, it's at 61%. But in urban areas, home ownership is as low as 22%. So that goes to tell you that Kenyans do own homes, just not in urban areas, because people come to Nairobi or these major cities in our country because they have come here to work. They don't necessarily want to buy homes and relocate permanently to these areas. So there needs to be, the framework of KMRC needs to be refined and aligned more towards accommodating that and acknowledging that the demand, especially in urban areas, is for rental development, is for rental units. So there needs to be a more focus on how then do we encourage developers to develop affordable rentals in urban areas as opposed to only focusing on the purchase side. And then when we talk about rates, to sum it all up, the main gap that exists with regards to rates in Kenya are the barriers to entry. So if you look at, we have very high minimum share capital requirements for trustees. Countries like US, the United States, they don't even have minimum share capital requirements. If you look at the high investment amounts for individual or investors currently, it's at 5 million. This again locks out the retail investors or individuals who may want to get into the rate sector. So these high minimum amounts, again, they beat the purpose of rates, because the main purpose of rates was to democratize access to real estate, so that even the retail investors or the low, I don't want to say low worth, but the opposite of high net worth individuals are able to access the rate market. So again, these share capital, these high minimum capital requirements, they discourage investors or people who may want to get into the sector. The other gap that we identified, again, which stems back to the regulatory framework and regulations that are currently in place, forming a rate takes close to 1 to 2 years, somewhere there. So that's a really long time for someone to be trying to set up a rate. So there needs to be this process requires to be streamlined so that it takes a shorter duration of time. Again, if you look at the rate regulations in Kenya, the rate regulations in Kenya, rates are currently structured as trusts, but in other countries, rates can be structured as public companies, limited liability companies. They can be structured as partnerships. They can be structured as corporations. So when we say in Kenya, rates can only be set up as trusts, we are somehow locking or confining ourselves, and this has actually has a negative impact to our rates market. So the main issue with rates we have identified are the regulations. So the regulations need to be reviewed. They need to ease up a little bit so that now they are able to encourage investors to get into the rate sector. For the affordable housing bill, there have been many apprehensions regarding certain aspects of the bill. And those that have been widely mentioned includes the 3% non-compliancy penalty, which people are saying is too punitive. Again, the definition of what will constitute affordable housing under the bill needs again to be refined, because as it is, it's ambiguous. So Joseph started by explaining that affordable housing is housing that an individual will spend not more than 30% of their income towards the payment of mortgages or utilities. So depending on the different income brackets and bands that we have, affordable housing will be different for for all individuals in these income levels. So the bill needs to come out clear and say, if it's affordable housing here, we are referring to a housing that is 1 million or say 2 million or 1.5, like that. So there needs to be clear definition as to what constitutes affordable housing. Again, one issue that has come out is how will the government ensure compliance in the informal sector? Because ensuring compliance in the formal sector is quite easy. People have pay slips, but how again do you ensure compliance in the non-informal sector? The other agency is KRA. So KRA, they offer incentives to promote affordable housing in the country, but the incentives are only given, or KRA only gives to developers that are developing projects under the affordable housing program. So the scope for KRA with regards to the incentives that they give to promote affordable housing requires to be expanded, so that then it goes beyond just affordable housing, so that each and every person, say first time home, people who are building their homes for the first time, they can also get to access these incentives. Again, the other issue is with these incentives, you have to go through very bureaucratic processes so that you are able to access these incentives. So our recommendation is make these incentives accessible to developers and buyers. And then lastly, for the State Department for Housing, like I had said, its focus should be on policy management. They should not be focusing on what the private sector can do at all. So yeah, those are the recommendations. I believe if implemented, the affordable housing agenda will stand a chance of actually fulfilling its target going forward. And the second part of the question, which recommendation I believe holds the most potential for immediate implementation and significant impact, I think I still retain my stance. KMRC and REITs hold the most potential in stimulating development of affordable housing in Kenya. Again, this is my view. So I propose that the government focuses on these two initiatives, and then the rest now can be complementary to these two initiatives. Yeah. Back to you, Allan.
Thank you, Effie. That was an interesting set of recommendations. Just before I leave you to maybe catch your supper or your evening glass of wine, if you partake, Joseph, we'll start with you. You give us your parting shot, then Effie. Joseph.
Thank you, Alan. I would like to thank all our listeners tonight for tuning in and having time to listen to us. And I would also recommend that you visit our website and read our latest report on affordable housing agencies in Kenya. Thank you. And also, you have a good night.
Effie.
Okay, for me, I think I start by saying that it's a good thing that the government is focusing on provision of affordable housing to its citizens. And us giving these recommendations, the intention is not to overshadow the ongoing governmental efforts to tackle the housing shortage in our country. These recommendations we give to complement rather than overshadow. That being said, I am grateful to have been a part of this engaging conversation, and I'd like to thank the viewers, the audience, for tuning in and making this discussion possible. And I'd like to encourage us all to go to our website, that is Cytonn Research, and read our report on affordable housing agencies. And I think, Allan, before we can close on the discussion, maybe perhaps if there are any questions, you can go ahead to take before we wrap up the session. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll leave the floor for the questions. Maybe we give it like a minute or two. Seems there are no questions. Well, I'll be the third to reiterate. You heard it from our analysts, but if you wish to find more information about today's topic, that is Affordable Housing Agencies report, I'll advise you to visit our page, our website, that is Cytonn Research, and you can have a look at our latest report and also previously done reports and research. Well, if there are no questions, always feel free to channel them through our page. I think that's it. We can close the meeting. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, our panelists, for listening in, for giving insightful views and having a good discussion today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to host this beautiful discussion. That's it. Have a good night, all of you.